Excellent. Well, I will begin. Interrupt me if you can't hear me or if any issues happen. So thank you to Ursula for the wonderful invitation to speak about the Archives Unleashed project. It's such an honor to be here today and perhaps provide another perspective from an infrastructure builder. And I was thinking that the talks are so great today, it really is a last and least kind of situation. So what I want to talk about in my 15-minute talk is provide a little bit of the project context behind, what we're doing, where the Archives Unleashed project comes from, talk about the current status, and then talk about a sort of investigation we're doing in partnering with the Internet Archive around something that they call the Whole Earth Web Archive. But let me talk a little bit about web archiving and infrastructure by providing context to what it is that we do. Before I get into the weeds, I want to highlight, of course, it's a team effort. I'm here today speaking for our team, but as you can see on the screen in front of you, I have a rich array of co-investigators, Nick, Jimmy Lynn, a computer scientist from Waterloo, Jefferson Bailey, a director at the Internet Archive, and then a host of developers and managers and product developers from the Internet Archive and the University of Waterloo. So we come at these questions from different disciplines and different perspectives in different institutions. Now, why we are engaged in an infrastructure building project really comes out of a love of web archives. We love web archives. I wrote a book in 2019 really revolving around the question of could you study the 1990s or the 2000s without using the web as a scholarly resource, how we're going to need to use web archives to explore cultural history, to explore social history, to explore the evolution of political parties and debates, business history, and beyond. But the problem with web archives isn't that there isn't enough data to study, it's that really there's too much data that they've collected over the last two and a half decades. That as I write here, available analytics tools, community infrastructure, and inaccessible interfaces really presented these high barriers for conducting research with web archives at scale. And I'll just underscore the scale of web archiving collecting around the world, that the Internet Archive has nearly 100 petabytes. They now speak of trillions of pages. It was hundreds of billions until a few months ago. They now talk about trillions of pages. And if we look at national libraries such as in France, in Britain, Portugal, Denmark, etc., where they've enacted legal deposit policies where all websites published in their countries are archived in perpetuity, if we were to go back of napkin and hand wavy, we might think that they have another 100 petabytes of cultural heritage as well. And so for me, as a historian, used to not having enough data, it's that transformation from scarcity to abundance that we're seeing unfolding before our eyes. Now, the problem is if you want to access those 100 petabytes of data held by the Internet Archive, really you're largely restricted to exploring them through Wayback Machines. So for example, you could visit the Internet Archive at archive.org/web, type in the URL of what you're looking for, and run a query. So here in this video that I hope is playing on Microsoft Teams, I'm going to go to the Internet Archive itself. Here's their Wayback Machine from a few weeks ago. Let's take a look back in time at the digital humanities. We can go down memory lane to some of our old favorite sites. I'll go, oh, we get a connection error. I refresh, it works. Already you're beginning to see some of the friction in using this infrastructure, which there's a side note, they're having all sorts of power outages in San Francisco, which also affects us. But in this case, I'm going to go back to 1999 and pull up a site from the European Digital Humanities Association. We get a redirect to King's College London. And now we can basically slowly begin to go through minutes of meetings. We can begin to explore, what the debates in the digital humanities were preoccupying this group in 1999. But there's problems to this model. So, we can go into detail, but I'll keep going. And there's pros of this, which is that if you have a specific query, you can quickly replay the page as it was. But the cons, I think, were probably apparent to you as you saw me use that interface. It's pretty slow. You're largely limited to page-by-page browsing. And if you wanted to do things like analyze all the text on all the pages on that digital humanities website, see how it changes over time, how links work, what images are used by different faculties, you can imagine all these kind of digital humanities questions that you just can't answer with the way that all this data is presented to you. And so fortunately for us, an international conversation that predated my time in web archives saw the world basically agreeing on a standardized file format that we're going to preserve for digital cultural heritage, which is the tool builder's dream is a standard file format. And so there's an ISO standard, the WARC file, a web archive file. It's an ISO standard that contains web archival material and information, takes all the data, the images, the text, et cetera, and you can work with it computationally. And so in other words, we have a global network, the internet, that really eludes study at scale. And even honestly, it's really hard to even do not at scale research using the Internet Archive, given the URL-centric infrastructure of the Wayback Machine. So that in a nutshell is the context of the sort of state of web archival analysis infrastructure. And so this is where our project has come in. We started in 2017. We developed something called the Archives Unleashed Cloud. You can see the little animated GIF in the window here. But basically, it was an interface to sync archivic collections or other collections that used Wasapi, which was an open API that only the Internet Archive really used, analyze them, generate derivatives, and work with them. In other words, you'd go to this website, you'd log in. Here I am. I'm pretending to be a Dalhousie University librarian. And you can work with those web archives and transform them into text files, transform them into graph files. In other words, make them kind of talk to your digital humanities ecosystem rather than being confronted with the WARC file. We also developed something called the Archives Unleashed Toolkit. That was the behind the scenes, kind of the deep plumbing of actually working with the WARC files. We realized this was too hard for researchers, not the most user-friendly interface. And so our goal was to break that in the background and have GUIs to let researchers work with them. So that was going well, but of course we ran into sustainability challenges. Can we really become the world's analytics platform running on a research server in Canada? And so what we've done now is we've decided, let's go to the data provider, the Internet Archive, let's integrate it with Archives Unleashed. And so we basically wanted to merge our project with the Internet Archive, try to come up with an end-to-end solution so that the collecting infrastructure of web archives could be co-located with the analytics infrastructure of working with web archives. This required a lot of thinking. I mean, the scale advantages of having our data and compute in the same data center as where data is stored has advantages that are well beyond, worrying about pipelines and data congestion as you move data around. And we also wanted to engage our community by finding a way to bootstrap research. We realized that the scale of this data was preventing researchers from working with it. If you build tools, they will not come. And so what if we can provide modest stipends to researchers, meet with them every other week, provide them with data, and really help bootstrap a community around the infrastructure that we're trying to create. So in other words, our project was going from, well, at left, there should be a picture of an old platform going to the Internet Archives interface, but more importantly, moving out of silos into community, trying to bring people together from their data to their storage. So what's the current status of the project? Basically, we've developed this platform. We finished one round of user interface testing. We're going into another round of user interface testing, user experience testing, trying to work with it's not the right video. I don't know why that's playing. If I have time, I can show another screenshot. Trying to show this interface. And if basically you now can log in, you go into the Internet Archive, and you can directly begin to work with your scholarly objects through this sort of dashboard. Sorry, I don't know why that video is different in this MS Teams presenter mode. In other words, we have the one-stop analysis of collections. Librarians, collectors, etc., can generate derivatives for users. We give permissions to scholars to work with collections. In other words, we've unleashed the collections found in the Internet Archive. I'll show the next slides, and I'll really quickly show you what that video was supposed to be. But I'll talk at the end of my slides about the Whole Earth Web Archive, which is a project we've begun to look at collaborating with the Internet Archive, trying to find ways of, again, how we can look at what they've been doing with collecting and leverage the power of analysis. So the Internet Archive has looked at their holdings, and they've critically realized that they, of course, have a underrepresentation of collections outside of the global north. that national libraries that do web archiving are largely, if not almost exclusively, in the global north, with some smaller exceptions. The Internet Archive tends to focus on the global north by the virtue by which they select which websites they'll crawl. And so they've launched a sort of proof of concept project where they picked the 50th smallest nations on the web archive. They extracted all of those parts of those national domains from their global Wayback Machine and are trying to see if there's some way they can sort of build analysis infrastructure, both to help researchers study what those web domains are and counterbalance the bias in these collections, and also to facilitate more targeted high-quality archiving of these domains by using it to do quality assurance and the like. So here, hopefully the video works, we have Andorra. These are all the different domains that they have been collecting. For each of these domains, you can check out some very basic analytic statistics of what those top-level domains look like. And then you can click on top sites, and then you can also do searches within that thing and look for images, look for videos. And it's sort of a proof of concept too of different search approaches that they can take in that area. Now, what we're hoping to do is to look at how we can use the Arch interface, which we're developing to work with these collections, how we can help make them accessible. We have debates as a team because we're always unsure about how much access we should provide with data sets. If we go through and crunch this data, what can we provide? GeoCities, we've provided large dumps. In part, so much of GeoCities is fully accessible in various spots on the web. It's sort of a done deal. But when it's come to web from the 1990s, there's lots of questions around privacy and rights that we haven't fully resolved as a team. We want to enable research, but we want to make sure we do it ethically, and we want to make sure we do it in a sustainable way. I'm going to really quickly show you what that video was supposed to be. And then I will turn it over to, just to show you, this is what that Arch interface looked like. This is what our goal is. A researcher can log in here. Here are different collections that they have access to. Someone's doing a study of the SOPA blackout, or if I was logged in on a different account, maybe I would even have that Andorra top-level domain. I can click on it. And you can see, this was a crawl that the Internet Archive carried out of the SOPA, which is a big domain fight. Here are all the different data sets I can then generate from this collection, whether it's, network data or, the plain text, even the JavaScript. And as leads one of our cohort teams, they're doing all sorts of cool stuff with HTML and JSON and JavaScript files from their collection, looking at some of the underlying data. And basically just trying to make a different way of sustainable infrastructure running over the long term on the Internet Archive servers to let people work with web data in a way that works for them and integrates with other workflows. So I'll apologize for those slide mix-up at the end. I'll close here and turn it back to Ursula for our discussion. So thank you.